It is no secret that Celeste is an amazing platformer. Its gameplay is tight and fun, it's got beautiful graphics and music, and its narrative is really engaging. It's definitely one of my favorite games of all time, but I started to ask myself, what about it makes it so great? And the answer I wanted to dive into deeper today was how the game makes me feel as a player. Celeste is a game about climbing a mountain, and its chapter-based levels not only show that to the player, but capture those ups and downs quite well emotionally through its narrative and gameplay. The final chapter of the main game, Summit, has always been one of my favorite chapters to replay, so I had to analyze it first. Get your analytical eye ready, gamers, and let's dive into this. Contextually, Summit comes after Chapter 6. Madeline has just hit rock bottom. You've progressed through climbing most of the mountain already, but Battleline and your emotions erased all of that progress in an instant. Narratively, it would initially seem pretty daunting to have to climb all of the mountain all over again. However, after embracing Battleline at the conclusion of Chapter 6, the player unlocks the ability to dash twice without touching the ground, demonstrated by Madeline's now pink hair. The game lets you practice this double boosting mechanic at the end of 6 without any obstacles or threats on the screen. No anxiety. You simply get to see how you can reach new heights with this new power. It's great at teaching the player the new mechanic, but I also find that it empowers or uplifts the player. The double boost is quite literally powerful, and would have been game-breaking in earlier chapters if you had it then. So right before the final level, the game is literally empowering the player. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that maybe even the color pink is a good visualizer of this. It's Madeline's new hair color after all, and will be pivotal to Chapter 7's color palette. As just stated, the double boost is empowering and gives the player even more control in their movement mechanics, making you feel quite unique and skilled moving into the final level. And it's also worth mentioning that the double boost is largely taken from you in Core and Farewell, which I think is a deliberate way of stripping the player of power for those epilogue levels. Now, let's fully get into Summit. The OST is not just a banger here, but it is quite literally filling you with determination. It opens with Madeline looking at the mountain, and you have to climb all of it, but it doesn't seem daunting in the slightest. It seems like a fun and joyful task almost. The music is pretty upbeat and has motifs from earlier themes as well, and overall it contributes to an upbeat and positive vibe of the level coming from the color scheme. There are a lot of warm colors right away as you're ascending during a sunrise. Most of the levels before had very dark colors at night, like dark blacks and blues and whatnot. Even if they were calming colors, they were dark. There's a brightness to this level which is unique outside of Chapter 4, I think. Summit's gameplay is broken down to many versions of each of the chapters that came before it, but because 6 was at the bottom of the mountain, it wouldn't fit into the level. Chapter 6 quote-unquote spot in Chapter 7 is actually the beginning, with a forest area almost more representative of the prologue. This forest area is really unique and one of my favorite sections of the game, simply because of how unique it is. We don't really see it anywhere else. The area gives a few obstacles, but none of them are very challenging. This area serves as a small tutorial on how to use the double boost when obstacles are presented. So it has a lot of simple walls and spikes, and outside of a few trampolines, it's relatively without a gimmick. Each mini chapter ends with a vertical section of Madeline and Battleline working together to achieve great heights. The purple orbs toss you up to the next section and give you a bit of dialogue. Madeline's newfound positivity and the pink colors of these ascending sections give an uplifting feeling, which is why I think pink is actually associated with that feeling. And as you enter the city, you see that pink shades and even more warm colors are thrown into the mix. It's clear that it's the same city from Chapter 1, but it's literally presented in a more positive light. Chapter 1 is quite calming in my mind, I love it, but from a color perspective, you have to admit that it's dark, which might invoke like a loneliness or a calming loneliness of the mountain. Chapter 1's main gimmick were these moving platforms, and they return here in Chapter 7. This is one of the most important and defining aspects of Summit. Its use of microcosm experiences that relate to each of the game's previous chapters or levels. It brings back old gimmicks in an isolated environment and presents them in new and harder ways. While these new ways would be quite difficult earlier in the game, with the player's empowerment of the double boost, the player can experience old gimmicks in a new way. It's incredible and contributes to a feeling of climax and finality, as the Summit isn't a new gimmick, but a master of everything within the game that came before. As you return to Old Site, you see that the new and uplifting color palette is continued. Before, this area of the game was very black, blue, and languid in its feeling. While the crumbled structure is in the foreground, you have this bright and beautiful pixel art sunrise in the background, which gives the area a whole new feeling. I noticed that few areas don't mandate the use of the double boost within this section, mainly because this area's gimmick, these cosmic brownie things, and these bubble things don't only refill one of your boosts, but both of them. And a lot of the time this gives you a little bit of room for error, and you only really occasionally actually need both boosts. I think this works out as it lets you continue to get used to the double boost mechanic before it's the only thing that you can rely on later on. Now when I played through Celeste initially all those years ago, Chapter 3 was one of the harder and more anxiety-inducing levels to me compared to things like Chapter 1 and 2. This is because the hotel has cramped corridors with an aggressive red and black color palette, and its platforming is more rhythm-based around these swirling bubble obstacles. When you return to the hotel in Chapter 7, it does not have that same ominous feeling as before. And this is partially because of the music. You still have that upbeat determination theme of Summit, and not that song from Chapter 3. I'm also focusing on the visuals, but I do have to say that part of the feeling definitely comes down to the amount of windows within this section. Almost every screen in the Summit version of Hotel has a window or two that showcases the beautiful sunrise in the background. That hope embodied by the sunrise is slightly locked away as you're not in front of it, and you're being challenged by harder and more obstacles. But that hope isn't gone. The sunrise is shown to you in every screen through a window. And I think this contrasts greatly to the original Chapter 3, where the hotel made you feel very enclosed and trapped, as like there was no windows and you were stuck inside there, with no way out. As stated before, I freaking love how Summit goes through each of the chapters that came before it to give the player a final test. It lets the developers push old gimmicks just a little bit further in difficulty, and lets the player's prior experiences and skill in the game shine. I think this section for Chapter 4 really demonstrates that. The moving platforms are unique to 4, and you are asked to navigate much more difficult situations than originally done. I think it's a testament to the game design intentions of the developers that their chapter gimmicks are so well developed that they can be used time and time again in increasingly difficult yet fair ways. Not even just here at Summit, but even in things like the B-sides as well. Visually, Chapter 4 section is not so different from the original. But for its place in Summit overall, the music is indeed slightly different. It maintains that basic uplifting theme of Summit, but it actually doesn't have the driving notes like in the earlier sections. It's very subtle, and you'll almost miss the musical cue, but it prepares you for what comes next. What is not a subtle musical change is when you approach the Mirror Temple for Chapter 5's mini-section. As there is no section for Chapter 6, as that area took place at the bottom of the mountain, the Mirror Temple is your final test before approaching the summit. Previously, the Mirror Temple was nightmarish. It had labyrinth level design, dark corridors that shrouded secrets and pits alike, creepy statues, tight anxiety platforming corridors, ominous music, and even Celeste's only enemies. If you felt out of your element in the original Chapter 5, that's completely intended by the developers. It tested Madeline's emotions and broke her. So as you approach the Mirror Temple again to be tested, the music reflects that. It's now slow and more ominous and not reflective of that determination summit theme at all. Visually, there is no glimpse of the sunset like in the hotel. You're within the temple, and the only visual sign of empowerment is your pink double boost hair. Now that Madeline has come to terms with the negative part of her, the temple doesn't affect her as much though. There is no darkness, there are no eyeball monsters. You were just tested by the gimmicks of the red bubbles and the sliding platforms. And I think this functions great as a visual narrative of how Madeline is doing on her journey back up the mountain. As you leave the temple and arrive at the home stretch, the determination music kicks back in. The home stretch of the summit doesn't use the prior gimmicks from earlier chapters, like the red bubble, the cosmic brownies, or even the moving platforms. The final stretch mainly focuses on the basic movement capabilities of Madeline in a vacuum. You're wall jumping, wall climbing, and boosting. You've mastered all of the gimmicks in the game so far, and the previous mini sections of Summit have proved that. Your final test is mastering the fundamental movement of the game, and I think that's beautiful design. Visually, the pink sunrise is nearly dominating the screen. You have this downward wind trying to hold you back, but this final challenge doesn't even feel grueling, and the small checkpoint flags at quick intervals really motivate the player to keep going. For the first time in the game, at the very end of it, you have visual, numbered indicators of how far you have left in the level. As you reach the summit, you ask yourself, why should I stop now? Eventually, the wind starts blowing upwards, giving you a bit more airtime when you jump. You become a bit floatier, and it almost makes the climb easier. The game is almost encouraging you to finish. Some of the final checkpoints are very precise. Nothing compared to the hard B-sides, but these jumps might be the hardest and most precise inputs you'll have to make in the main 7 chapters of the game. And it's very fitting, as it's literally the end. What I really like is how the final checkpoint, checkpoint 1, has no challenge at all. It's just a short climb up the last bit of the mountain as the music fades out, leaving only you and the summit. So that's my analysis and interpretation of Celeste's Summit. Without a doubt, a perfect finale for a platforming game. I don't think anything will beat it. What are your thoughts? Do you agree on my takes, or do you have any unique points that you want to raise in the comments? This video that I'm making now will kick off a series of analysis videos on platforming games like Mario, Donkey Kong, Shovel Knight, all that fun stuff. So if any of that sounds up your alley, hit that subscribe button. I'm excited to do more analyses like this, and I'll see you all next time.